Live from Orlando, Florida, you're now listening to the OZone Podcast, the voice of Orlando Magic fans. Join us every week for a unique fan perspective on all of the latest Magic news and updates. The show starts now.
Welcome back to another episode of the OZone Podcast, brought to you by DraftKings and part of the Basketball Podcast Network. We're your hosts, Al, myself, Anthony, and today we have a very special guest joining us, writer for the Orlando Magic and also director of digital news, Dan the Savage.
I like that. I guess Gary Harris coined that one for me, so it's sticking for a while.
Yeah. I saw that you had updated the Twitter bio that you had, so you even put the Savage in parentheses. I like that you took advantage of it. But
I had a lot of requests, so I'm a man of the people. I had to accommodate all the requests coming in. Otherwise, didn't want any of the Twitter backlash. So went with the Dan Savage, much as in Gary Harris, starring as Gary Harris.
I like it. We have to know a little bit more of this long line of savages that you come from.
Yeah, no, it's funny enough. I don't have it in my official name title, but I'm actually the third. So I do follow a long line of just Dan Savages, and obviously it's been the family name for quite some time. So I do come from a long line of Savages who are all honored by the fact that our namesake came up during Magic Media Day and was a focal point of social media following that.
Dan Savage III actually has a really nice ring to it. Like it sounds like a king in a fantasy land. So Dan, how does it feel to be, actually live and in person and finally being able to do these interviews, in front of the players and not behind just Zoom conferences, and through the computers? No,
Anthony, that's a great point. Last season, I just felt like we lost so much, being at a distance, just being in a box in a Zoom call. And it was one thing when you had guys you were familiar with. Like, obviously, I've known Vooch for almost a decade. Evan Fournier's been there a long time. Aaron Gordon, I've gone to, multiple all-star events with him, as well as covered him for a long time. But then as you make the big trades mid-season and guys are coming in and, rookies are added, being at a distance and trying to establish relationships is extremely difficult. So, it wasn't until I think about Summer League, the first time I actually stood next to Cole Anthony and was able to get a good size comparison.
Really? That's right.
Media Day is the first time I meet Gary Harris in person, and some of the other guys that come in. So doing that aspect of the job, meeting these guys in the person, allows you to build a trust level, a familiarity. Guys see you traveling with them. They know, that you're part of the whole thing, and they can delineate you from somebody else. And what it really helps is when I'm doing things like this. Last season, if I was asked to hop on a podcast, it's like, well, the stories I have are the same things that you're seeing on the Zoom press conferences that we upload to the website. So I don't have too much else to add other than my takes. At least now, I have some stories from training camp, have some stories from the game, seeing some things at practices, etc., that I could bring to the table that couldn't do before.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because they've mentioned it numerous times that, it's really hard to cover the team night in person. So you definitely get a different feel. Now, let me ask you, you mentioned that you've had these relationships built with Nikola and with Evan Fournier. We talk a lot about the NBA being a business. How much does it affect you as being an individual that do cover these players for a long period of time, that they get traded halfway through the season? Now you kind of have to start over and building those relationships. Does it impact you any differently as, it may with some of the players on the team?
No, definitely. I mean, when you get to know some of these guys, there's a trust level. You could go to them on, off the record, get insights from them about the team, what they're really feeling. They become familiar with you. They know, after a while of how you've covered them, that you're fair and balanced and have good intentions. So when you lose that and you lose it all at once, it's a bit of an adjustment. But, for me, I've also been, working in the NBA in some capacity since 2006. So it's not something that's new to me in any way. But when you have that many trades, especially mid-season, it's a big adjustment. So because usually you'll have one or two trades maybe that are big towards the trade deadline, but to have, three of them is pretty substantial. So that was a big adjustment. And then, like we were talking about, doing it amidst Zoom conferences makes it tougher because the guys that are coming in, it's harder to have conversations with them and get to know them.
Dan, you've been with the team for a while. You mentioned that, you know, you've had these relationships with these players for a long time.
Yeah.
What would you say is by far your most memorable moment with the Magic? One moment that you can look back to and say, man, like this was special.
Yeah, this one's tough because there were a lot, especially, you know, I joined, my first season was the 2008-2009 season. So I hop on, and first year we go to the NBA Finals.
Not a bad time to hop on.
It was a special time. And I think back to the playoff series in Boston in the Eastern Conference semifinals that year. Boston previously in its history was something that, like, I think it's 32-0 in a Game 7 situation when they were up previously, like 3-2 in a series, and they had home court. There was some long statistic. And, you know, it just felt like if they could beat the Boston Celtics in the Garden like this, with the way that momentum was going, they could make a finals run. And, you know, going into that game, it was a hostile crowd. Guy behind me, you know, had noticed that my, you know, media seat, because the fans were right on top of the media seating there, noticed that it said OrlandoMagic.com. It was harassing me the whole game. You know, I think we used to do a live chat back then, because this is kind of like, as Twitter's coming on, we used to have a blog called Cover It Live, where we would go and interact with fans and kind of post thoughts, and fans would interact back during that series. And it was so hard to focus because the guy, like, every play was just saying stuff. And so for the Magic to go and win, for me to kind of have a last laugh with him, and then go into the locker room afterwards, where I think Stan Van Gundy had written on the wall 32-1, you know, for the fact that the Magic had won. The energy in that locker room afterwards was just, you know, amazing. And so to be there to cover that type of moment was something special with this very special team. And then the whole subsequent season, because it's one thing, like, to cover a team that kind of surprises people, gets to the finals. But the interesting thing about the part of the next year was that it was, like, expected, you know? And so throughout the whole season, you're like, okay, this is all building up to what happens in the postseason. And then to go through the first two playoff series where you sweep the then Bobcats, you sweep the Hawks. They beat the Hawks by, like, a record margin in the playoff series. It was something like an average of 18 or 19 points a game. That was special as well, especially the guy behind me, Vince Carter, you know, cover another Hall of Famer caliber player on that list. You know, that was a fun back-to-back seasons of events.
It's funny you mentioned Boston, Dan, because I actually lived up north before, and Boston is my closest arena. So for the 2010 season, when Vince was with the team, I made it out there to a couple games in Boston. And like you mentioned, the fans there were ruthless. Like, my wife and I were the only ones with blue Magic gear in the entire arena. Everybody else was wearing green. But funny enough, it was my favorite memory as a Magic fan, just because they were throwing peanuts at us, going back and forth when Dwight was on the free throw line. But I wouldn't change it for the world. I would change the outcome of what happened. But unfortunately, you know, the memory itself was incredible to be a part of that.
Yeah, no question. Going into a hostile environment, those fans get into it. I could tell you, even for the preseason game that we played there to open the season, those fans were into it. So, you know, it's definitely a tough environment to win in, but when you do, you know, for the whole experience, it's all the more special.
That's right.
By far, to this day, one of my favorite Orlando Magic teams. And there's a lot of, I feel like there's always debates when it comes to Magic fans and thinking about those teams on, you know, what if we would have did this? What if, you know, Rafer Alston played more than Jameer? What if Courtney Lee would have made that layup, that alley-oop layup? Like, what dynamics would have changed? So you being able to witness a lot of these moments personally, if you were to go back in time and adjust, like, you have the Dan Savage power to be able to change a Savage moment, what would be that one moment that you would change in Magic history to where, you know, maybe it could have been a little bit more in our favor?
You know, That's a lot. There's a lot of those because you could look at the Courtney Lee layup. If that goes in, does that alter the way that series goes? Like you mentioned, the Rafer Alston, Jameer Nelson balance in that one. Which the thing that I always like to point to fans, because I had this conversation with radio analyst and former Magic coach Richie Adebato kind of while it was happening, and what he pointed to was the Magic beat the Lakers in both regular season contests that they played them that season. So the 2-0 in the regular season of that year against the Lakers. And in both of those wins, Jameer Nelson had played a huge role. So I think what it had to be in Stan's mind was that if we could add Jameer back and even get, a bit of him, he was so effective against that team in the regular season that had to play, partial of a role into his thinking of bringing him back in that final series. But for me, like I said, I felt like the 2010 team was so loaded and obviously, came close. I'd like to get another shot at the start of that series because I felt like the way the Magic had to sit for so long in between playoff series, whereas meanwhile, Boston was battle tested going against LeBron and a Cavs team. And they came in, just after this big brutal battle while the Magic were having to sit back. And I felt they were just a little bit more in tune, whereas the Magic kind of had to, gain momentum back as they were going against Boston. So I could look at that series. The other thing that I've always wondered that make a good what if is what if, the Magic decide to keep Hito Turkoglu and still make the Vince Carter trade. That would be an interesting lineup with just how many scorers you could have rolled out there, but with Jameer being able to create his own shot, Vince being able to do it, Turk being a great playmaker, and then still rolling in guys like Petrus, Q Rich off the bench. That would have been an Matt Barnes off the bench, etc. That would have been interesting basketball right there. I'd like to see how that all would have played together.
Man, what about you? What would be that one thing that you would go back in time for?
I was just going to say, it's funny he mentioned that because that's my number one, what if in Magic history, just because, again, I'm a huge Vince Carter fan and I really, really wanted Vince to have another shot to get to the finals. Again, that's the one thing that I, as a fan, unfortunately never got to see Vince make it to that stage. And I really thought that year they had that chance. Now, things didn't play out. My thinking was reload, try it again the following season. And if you guys remember, when it all went down, it was just a weird timing, right? Like the team was kind of a flu virus that kind of hit the team in December. Yeah. And they lost a couple games. And then next thing you know, we blew it up. So I kind of wish that flu never happened. And the team was playing well. Like they had lost a few games, but they were playing well. I really think if they would have kept that team together, they would have made some noise once again in the Eastern Conference. And you never know how things play out towards in the playoffs and towards the finals. But I really think that Magic team deserved more time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really wanted to see, if I can go back in time, I would really want to see what a Trace McGrady, Dwight Howard lineup would have looked like.
That's a good one too.
Thinking back, and I know that the relationship between John Wise, Rod Trace McGrady was really, really sour, and there was like a point of no return. But just thinking, Trace McGrady had made a comment that I want to play with the best center in the league, and he really felt that was Yao Ming. What he didn't know was that was definitely going to be Dwight Howard for a very long period of time. And just the thought that, who knows, maybe Trace McGrady stays a lot healthier. Who knows? But just thinking of potentially having our own Kobe Shaq dynamic, like in that era, I think that would have been ridiculous. Ridiculous. That would definitely be 100% without a doubt. A healthy Trace McGrady and Dwight Howard.
It's hard to argue with.
Now, modern day Orlando Magic basketball. We've had a couple games already in the preseason. What do you think of the new guys so far? How do you like the new dynamic? How do you like Coach Moses' system with the new guys? How are you feeling with this new era of Magic basketball?
Oh, it's an exciting time with the Orlando Magic, and it starts with Coach Mosley, as you mentioned. There's such a unique, interesting dynamic with him in that, he has such an energy about him and he's such a good connector of people. And when, people ask me, oh, what do you think of, Coach? And I try to explain it. It's hard to point to like one thing because with him, it's more just a consistency and a collection of things, just the, acknowledgement, calling you by your name, just, the way that he comes up and makes little connections. If he remembers something about you, he brings it up in conversation. It really makes you feel, connected with him. And, that's not just with me, that's observing him doing it with other people, other members of the media, other people with the staff, other players. And he just got that real unique aspect about him. And I was impressed with it on his first day on the job, even more impressed with it watching him closely throughout the weeks of summer league. And then now into training camp, it's just consistency in that regard. And I think when you have a young team with so many impressionable young players that's trying to shift the culture and build a new environment, I think that's so important. And you could see, whether it be the viral photo of him with the basketball in his fan basketball in his hand that caught fire, or just the way and the dynamic he interacts with the players on the court. It's unquestioned. He's a good fit for this team, especially where it is right now. And I think that's going to pay big dividends as these players develop and go later into their careers. And, to have a guy like him with a background in player development who's been through the process, he played basketball, at a high level himself. He's only, 42, 43 years old. So he's got the ability to relate to these guys on a different level. I think it's a good fit. And, it's been, really neat to observe this and where it's going.
No, I completely agree with you. I think it's you can see it, right? With Coach Mosley, the way that the guys just kind of connect with him, how they talk about him at media day, into the preseason when they've done media. It's that communication, that connection, not only on the court, but also off the court with the players. And again, that's going to transition into great things for these young guys as the season progresses. So taking it to an individual level, who do you think has benefited the most, or who has impressed you the most on a player standpoint so far this season?
Ooh, that's tough. I've been really impressed with the fact that, Mo Bamba has never had a true offseason where he's really been able to focus on his craft. And so this was going to be his first offseason where he'd be able to really work on it. And, he's going to have a new staff, a fresh start. Vooch, who, you have an all-star center in front of you. It was always going to be an obstacle. So now, that path is clear a little bit. You have a new head coach. You have a full off season. What was he going to do with it? Was he going to capitalize on that opportunity? And I think, clearly through a few preseason games, we're seeing, in fact, that he has. And I think it all started with Mo from the fact that he attended Summer League. He didn't have to, but he went up there early, picked up the principles of Coach Mosley's system, what were going to be important things for him to do defensively so he could help anchor that unit. And he's made the most of it. I think that's why he's having such a good start, is because it didn't start for him training camp day one. He's been going through this process with Coach Mose for months now. So I really like the work that he's put in and the progress he's showing. And the other guy, a guy who people question who should start, and well, in fact, we're seeing them play right alongside each other, is Wendell Carter Jr. He's made an impact since the moment he got here, worked in the offseason on extending his range, and we're seeing dividends with that guy as well. So the two big men in Orlando have been really impressive in training camp, and excited to see what it looks like with them playing together even more. Hopefully we see some more of that tomorrow night against the Celtics.
I love everything about having them in the lineup together, everything about it, because it feels like, you're getting the twin tower with that defensive presence where, you blow by one of them. You still have to deal with Mo Bamba or Wendell Carter. And they're so different. Wendell reminds me of a old school power forward, big man that really uses his muscle. And then, Mo Bamba's more, in my opinion, your modern big man today. Now the question is, Mo Bamba's been doing so well this preseason that, in my opinion, looks like a completely different player. You mentioned that this is really one of the first off seasons that he really had to be able to really develop. Do you feel like he's really made that turn? Can fans have confidence enough with what we've seen so far to really see him, progress even more? Because up to this point, it's been a little disappointing. We've expected more, but now we're starting to see the dividends from it.
Yeah, and I think, the one thing, if you're looking for the positive side of things, is you look at the way he finished last season. That was impressive. You're starting to show flashes, and they were becoming more and more consistent. And then you look and say, okay, well, what is that guy going to do with what we saw in those flashes? Is he going to, rest on his laurels, or is he going to work hard in the offseason? And then when it comes to the offseason, we see him show up at Summer League. We see him putting a lot of work in. And, that quickly translates into training camp and the preseason. So I think the next step for Mo is having some consistency to start the regular season, because there's no question the potential's there. A guy of that size with that wingspan, his ability to block shots, and his stroke from the outside all bode very well for his future in the NBA. It's just going to be consistency, doing things the right way, not making defensive lapses or being slightly late on rotations. And as long as he continues to do that, which he's done tremendously throughout the preseason, I think everybody's got a reason to be very excited about Mo Bamba. And it's not just us here in Orlando that are noticing. People on the national level are starting to pick up as well. So it's exciting to see him get that kind of recognition, and hopefully he continues to build on it.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of excitement just with Mo Bamba alone. If he can develop into the player that we think we drafted back in 2018, if he can become that player, I think that's going to be a massive boost to the Orlando Magic. Then you add to that, of course, J.I. coming back, Markel, and all the young guys that we've assembled in this team. It could take the team to another level for sure. Now, Dan, when it comes to the opposite stream, so what about things that may be worrying you so far in preseason? Are there any things that you've noticed you're like, hey, like that's something we got to fix before next Wednesday when games actually matter?
Well, I think the tough thing that this team's gonna have to deal with early on is, any team that has a new head coach always has a tough start to the season, because there's only so much time in training camp to install so many things. Even, you look at Steve Clifford in his final year in Orlando had a veteran team with returning players, and there were still elements of his system, even with players being very familiar with it, that they were still installing, a couple games into the season and so on and so forth. Now yet that you have a very young team with a new head coach, it's going to take a while to install all the elements of his offense and his defense. So I think at this stage where they are right now is they have the base principles in place. They have an offense designed where it can rely on, playmaking, free-flowing nature, good decision-making of its guards. But you're also still relying on guards who are young and inexperienced, and albeit they have, tremendous potential, it's going to take a while. So I think for me, the start of this season's got to be all about growth. Are we seeing growth out of those young players game to game? Are they winning the days in practice? Are they having good practices and building on the next one? The mistakes that we see in game one, are they still making them in game 4, or are they correcting them? So, I think the thing I want to see early on is how they handle dealing with that adversity, and do they continue to build as the season progresses?
And I think a large part of that, and the part of it that makes it exciting, is that there's so many young players on that team that, it's a tall order for Coach Mosley, because there's a lot of talent to try and develop. How do you see him focusing on so many different players? Is he really capable? Is any coach really capable of trying to develop 7-8 really young players that could potentially have a really high ceiling?
Well, if there is a coach, I think it's him. That's his background, and that's the type of staff he's brought in as well. A head coach often gets the credit and the blame, but a lot of times, assistant coaches, have tremendous responsibility as well. And he's brought in a really good deep staff, and you can notice that right away in Summer League with the way that these guys operate a practice when they're called upon to do their, research on a team, or give their scouting report, or give their take of the practice plan for the day. He's got a good staff underneath him that I think is going to help cultivate this, because you're right. It's not just always going to be one guy, although I believe he's a great leader and will help set the tone, but he's got a good staff underneath him. And I think the other part to it is that as you look through each position group, there is a veteran presence there. So if you look at the center, you've got Robin Lopez working with those big men. And I think having a guy like him who you got to bang with every day in practice is a valuable asset. You look at the wing positions and having Terrence Ross and Gary Harris and their presence there. And then you look at the backcourt, having a guy like Etuan Moore, who's been on both sides of this thing. He's been with a young, rebuilding Orlando Magic group back in 2014-ish, all the way fast forward to his son's team last year that's young and finding its way to the NBA Finals. So each position group has that balance. He's got good assistant coaches and a head coach who's got a background in player development and high basketball level experience himself. So I think you got a good a group here, and that's without mentioning, Jeff Weltman, John Hammond, their staff that they've built from a front office perspective. I really like the way things are shaping out here in Orlando for the future of this franchise.
And it's funny you mentioned Etuan Moore. He's one of the guys that we've heard Jalen Suggs now referred to multiple times as a guy who's on his year, working with him after practice, getting him to get better on his game individually. Talking about Jalen Suggs here quickly, I'm going to add to that as well. Our other rookie, Franz Wagner. What are your thoughts so far for them in preseason? I know fans are kind of worried a little bit. The stats haven't been there. But of course, it's preseason again. None of it really matters. But what are your takes so far on Jalen Suggs and Franz Wagner early in the season?
Really, really excited about both of them. And, this is one of those things we were talking about at the beginning of the show where it's like, when you're traveling, do you pick up more? And, definitely in this case, it definitely applies. So I could tell you from being at Summer League, one of the fun things about being at Summer League in Vegas is wherever you're sitting, whether it be out to dinner at a restaurant or, at a media table and the people next to you, you're always sitting next to somebody's scout, somebody's video guy, some guy from a third-party company that has the software that's going to peg who the next NBA superstar is. You got all that all blended together. It's like a diehard hoops fan's dream. So I love Summer League for that environment. And I could tell you at the start of this thing, everybody, and this is just strictly removing any Magic people from the equation. I'm not talking about anybody affiliated with the Orlando Magic who may have some sort of, bias towards the success of these players. And I cannot tell you how many times somebody was like, we either had Jalen Suggs number 1, 2, or 3 on our board. So excited for the future of this guy. We had tremendous conversations about him. Love his character and makeup. Love what he could do. Franz Wagner, our analytics people had this guy marked as, a steal of the draft, a perfect, player that's going to make other players around him better. Would have an immediate impact if you threw him in on a veteran team because he knows how to cut, knows how to move away from the basketball, and just has innate abilities you can't teach. So, that was kind of, you love to hear that secondary confirmation from other sources that it's not just you who's seeing it or, people with the team that's seeing it. It's coming from every direction. And so then I think you add to that, having watched these guys closely, there's a lot of elements to their game, I think, that a lot of other rookies would struggle with. So, look, Steve Clifford used to say this all the time when he's here. He's like, any player in the NBA can go and put up hollow stats. These type of guys are not going to be hollow stat guys. They're going to contribute to winning basketball. They both play, they're both going to be two-way players. Jalen Suggs has the willingness to, fight through screens defensively, make tough plays. You could see the fact that he was both Mr. Basketball and Mr. Football in the state of Minnesota, during his high school career. He plays that way. He plays like that kind of physical presence. With Franz Wagner, I think he's going to suffer a little bit early in his career while the Magic are trying to figure out the lineups, and you have point guards who are trying to figure out the system, just in the sense that he is such a good cutter. And if you look, there's times he's going to the basket that if you were with a veteran point guard, they might find him right away. Or, if everybody was familiar with the system, they know what he was doing. He's not going to make mistakes, and that's, valuable to have. Will he flash immediately in the points and those type of things right off the bat? That'll be interesting to see. I don't know the answer to that question because obviously in preseason, that's not the focus is like, let's get Jalen 30 or, Franz Wagner 20, etc. But I like the cerebral nature of both those players. And I think the long-term future for them both is extremely bright. And I think Magic fans should be excited about both of them.
So there's obviously a lot of things to be excited about when we talk about Jalen Suggs and Franz Wagner. Now, what would you say to the fans that, we had a really strong showing, or excuse me, Jalen Suggs had a really strong showing in the summer league, but during this preseason where now we're actually on the courts and we're playing against, these NBA players, these NBA teams, it kind of dwindled down a little bit. What would you say to the fans that haven't been impressed with Jalen Suggs and Franz Wagner as of yet?
Yeah, I think, Jalen Suggs addressed it best when, asked before the start of preseason, what he was hoping to get out of it. And he's like, my goal isn't to go out and score 30 every night or a triple double. It's, preseason. It's developing within the flow of the offense, taking down the key principles and, and trying to build a flow and a repertoire, figure out where other guys are trying to be, and vice versa. Other guys are trying to figure out how to play alongside these guys. And so kind of where I was going with the Franz thing, where, if you plugged him into a veteran team right off the bat, I think he would fit easy because he just does so many of the little things very well and makes other guys around him better. When you're in a nature where, okay, you're still trying to figure out rotations. What's the starting group? You're taking everybody out of that. It's a lot to also ask for young players to then have a consistency in their statistical, flow with them as well. So I think as you see the season start, playing groups start to form, there's a consistency and chemistry built amongst these guys. You're going to see the performance and the statistical stuff start to flow as well. Look at when the Heat were formed with, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, and LeBron James, who are all in the prime of their careers. There was a flow there that took time, and those guys are, at some of the best level. In fact, it wasn't even until season 2 that they really reached their pinnacle. So to be making any sort of judgments off a team with a new head coach that's still developing playing groups, rotations, and stuff like that, and put that upon 2 rookies who've had 3 preseason games that really the practices in a lot of ways are more important than these games in some sense of the effort they put forth towards them, like in terms of like game planning, etc., is just foolish because like during a regular season game, for example, the day before's practice is dedicated to correcting those mistakes you've seen from the prior game and, maybe some install for the next game. And then the shoot around is solely focused on the opponent, things that they do, how are we going to adjust to that? Here's what we're going to do in the flow. In the preseason, there's none of that. It's still about installing offense, focusing on that, and then you just roll it out there against the other team and then make the corrections afterwards. So to base any sort of judgments off those elements is foolish. It's you're gonna want at least a 15, 20 game sample size into this regular season before you start trying to draw any really valuable conclusions as to the development of certain guys, because it's going to take a while for them to build up a rapport, get used to a certain starting unit, who are the reserve guys, etc. And then we could start figuring out as the offense becomes fully installed, as the defense becomes fully installed, what these guys are really made of.
And I think it's kind of similar to Cole Anthony during the summer league. I feel, the average fan, they weren't impressed with Cole Anthony, what he was doing. They, we heard the comments of Cole Anthony is not the same. He's too little, like all these little things that they were saying about Cole Anthony. And then preseason comes around, and he's a completely different player. And I think that, the average fan needs to understand that, these things do take time. It's a transition from college basketball to now professional basketball. There is going to be a transition that needs to take place for these guys to get comfortable and to be able to find their way. Now, with that being said, kind of going back to, there's a lot of players to develop, and a lot of our young guys have a high ceiling. When you take a look at our roster, who would you say is the most important player for this upcoming season for the team to be successful? And whatever that definition may be.
Well, I mean, that's really tough. What you want to see, in my opinion, out of this particular season is you want to see a consistent growth from a lot of the young players, and then have 1 or 2 guys emerge that you're like, okay, they're guys that could potentially be, difference makers. And if you get that is a success. If it's trending in that direction. I think the other thing, which you guys kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, is then reintegrating, Jonathan Isaac and Markelle Fultz as they come back from injury. Because in order for this thing to, all really work the way that we want to in the future, it's like not only do you have to have growth amongst these guys, but you got to have the two other guys who can be key factors into this, organization's success, reacclimate and develop well. So if they can reacclimate and come into this, come into the team at some point during this season, and we're seeing steady growth from a number of the young players, whether that be Jalen Suggs and Franz Wagner, who we've talked about, or guys like R.J. Hampton, Wendell Carter Jr., Cole Anthony, Mo Bamba, etc. I mean, even Chuma Okeke, who a lot of people don't mention as much because he's dealing with the hip thing right now. But as all these guys start to come back and become reacclimated, are we seeing steady growth from the young guys? Because if we get steady growth from all or a high percentage of these guys, and then reintroduce Jonathan Isaac and Markelle Fultz, this thing's going to be trending in a nice direction very quickly. So to me, it's just all about growth day to day. It doesn't have to happen overnight, but just day by day, month by month, week by week, month by month, are we seeing progression in different guys' games? And if we see that, alongside the reintroduction of the other guys, I think that this is going to be a successful season for the Orlando Magic.
Now, if you had to just name one guy that will improve the most between October and April when the season ends, who do you think that player would be?
I mean, I'm going to go with Jalen Suggs just because, I think it's going to be evident when you have a young player who's going to have the ball in his hands a considerable amount, and things will be asked for him to create the flow of the offense. I think as he becomes familiar with his teammates, it's going to help him tremendously as his teammates become familiar with him. And then just as he gets the run through of the NBA gamut, you look at the list of guards you have to go up every night and primary ball handlers, it's just brutal. And so as you go through that at least once and have a good sense of okay, what is it like going up against Chris Paul, who can, get in your face and disrupt you? As we saw in that first preseason game, what's it like going up against Marcus Smart, where he's in your face, possession to possession, and the physical nature with which he plays the game, and some of the things the refs might not see because he has a way of doing it about him. He's a crafty veteran. Those type of elements, as you get to see a guy a second time, that's why I was really hoping that Marcus Smart was going to play tomorrow night, was just to see that secondary matchup. Did Jalen pick up on things from the first one? So we'll have to wait for the regular season to see that. But I think for these primary ball handlers or just guards in general, because obviously he'll play some off ball as well, it really takes a full run through to have tremendous winning success. And so I think for him, he's going to make a big jump from the start of the season to midway through.
Now, Dan, ESPN has the Orlando Magic being dead last when we talk about standings. ESPN and their clever articles. What are you thinking? If we were to align the perfect storyline for the Magic, and we do get back a healthy Jonathan Isaac, a healthy Markelle Fultz, we have a healthy roster, and we start to see the development with our young guys. Do you see the Magic winning more than 22 games?
I think what it's going to take for that to happen is that early in the season, the veterans are going to, have to carry the load. You're going to have to see Terrence Ross get off to a hot start. You're going to have to see Gary Harris be, more like the player he was in Denver than his first season in Orlando to help steady the load. You're going to have to see the consistency from Mo Bamba that we've seen in the preseason, Wendell Carter take a step. And then that can help some of the other young guys as they're starting to find themselves and make their ascension. And, then they could kind of balance down. So if you can get out of that, I think you'll have a more successful season than, perhaps whatever statistical basis that ESPN's using for that type of article. So I think that's what kind of nature you're going to have to see early is veterans are going to have to get off to hot starts. And then that'll allow for, as the young players make their progression to kind of level out a little bit and still maintain success.
Yeah, I think that you said it perfectly. I think that's what it would take to see the Magic overcome that 22.5 game prediction that ESPN and other media outlets have given us. Like, I mean, they're having us as being one of the worst teams in the East. And again, as you're mentioning, if things work out, I can't see that being accurate. And hopefully that will be the case. Now, for you personally, what is one bold prediction for the Magic this upcoming season?
Ooh, bold prediction, hot take time. I haven't really thought about that as much just because, I've been so focused on looking like a player by player growth, because I think that's in order for us to like really, because obviously, like, look, the Magic could have stayed put with the veterans that they had, and there was a certain ceiling on this group, right? They were only going to go so far. So when you do an adjustment like this, it's to make the potential ceiling higher. So, any goals that you could set forth this season, I think have to be focused towards making that ultimate ceiling that they potentially have, higher and higher. So to me, it's going to be growth. I think one of the things that I would like to see, maybe is just that when we come to the point in the season where they're having the All-Star nominations for rookies and sophomores, that the Magic have a high level of representation both among the rookie base and the sophomore base, if they choose to do that. I haven't, they've done these world things and international things. I haven't looked to see what the latest iteration of it, but just assuming that that's where the take place at NBA All-Star Weekend, where you had a traditional rookie sophomore game, that the Magic had multiple representation in that game. Because to me, that if they're being seen that way, then things are progressing in the right nature. Now, as we all know, being in Orlando, it could be the case where we have multiple players worthy of that and don't get the representation anyway, because that's the kind of love we can get at times. I mean, Aaron Gordon won the dunk contest, or at least Ty won the dunk contest twice, and still didn't get credit for it. So I'm not going to put too much on the NBA All-Star plate because they've shunned us before. But in the sense that if we have multiple guys playing that way, I like what that does for the ultimate ceiling of this team into the future.
Yeah, that even reminds me of Cole Anthony getting a snub on the all-rookie, not even the all-rookie second team, where he was close enough to where he was, one player away, was it out?
Yeah, I mean, he had 2 game winners under his belt, so
I wish people could see what we see.
Yeah, just keep close up. Keep sleeping.
All right, Dan. So we're gonna jump into our overtime section where we throw out some rapid questions out to you. All right. So this very first one is Shaq or Dwight?
Now, when we say Shaq or Dwight, are we talking about the ultimate arcs of their careers? Or are we just talking about what they did for the Magic? Because there's two different things there. Because I think ultimately, like, look, Shaq was the more dominant specimen. If you could have had 8, 10, 12 years of Shaq with the Magic, that'd probably look, pretty good. But ultimately, who did more for the Magic? And you look at Dwight, the finals appearance, won a finals game, probably in a huge part responsible for helping get that arena built that we all enjoy and love here in Orlando. 8 seasons, multiple straight Defensive Player of the Year awards. He probably did more for the Magic, although Shaq put him on the map in the 90s. But ultimately, better player all time, definitely Shaq. But Dwight, not to be undersold. I mean, heck, I took this job because Dwight Howard was in Orlando Magic uniform. So that's the kind of things that you don't even see or think about in the butterfly effect chain of events. Is just that, like, when you have a player like that, when people are thinking about making career decisions, what organizations do they join? You have a player like that, people want to hop on board and cover that. So yeah, I mean, Dwight's impact here was enormous. So was Shaq's. Be happy to have second iterations of either of them.
And just to kind of follow up on that, because I've always been curious with this question. This is a debate that I have way more often than not. Let's say that the Orlando Magic organization, they decide to lighten the restrictions on the requirements for retiring a jersey. Does Shaquille O'Neal deserve to have a jersey retired in the rafters if the Magic decided to hang jerseys?
Yeah. That's a tough one, especially for a team that doesn't currently have any retired. his time was short, but his impact was huge. A lot of people became Magic fans because of Shaq. So that's a tough one, because usually you'd want a player who's like, signed multiple contracts with a team, played that kind of duration, or, brought a team championships. Like if Shaq in his short time won the championship, then you'd say, unquestionably, like, retire his jersey, especially if it were the first championship, for a franchise. But, I like what the Magic are doing with the, Magic Hall of Fame and honoring and bringing back guys that way. Just because it allows to tell the story, brings a number of people together. And I think those are moments that's special. So the fact that they're, at least finding a way to honor these guys is nice. But I'll be interested to see, as time goes on, who the first jersey retired is. Hope I'm there to get to see that.
Now, Dan, I'm going to ask a quick yes or no question here.
Okay.
Are you ever worried about what Cole Anthony may say during an interview?
I'll go yes, because I just want to make sure I hear it, because it's probably amazing. Because it's like, whether it be the bet or, or this or that. I mean, the guy is a quote gold mine. So you just want to make sure. I'm worried that he'll say something and I won't be there to hear it, kind of thing. I want to make sure I'm there for all his interviews.
It's a lot of really good sound bites. Really good sound bites. It's like a walking GIF ready to happen.
Exactly.
What would you say is your all-time favorite Orlando Magic uniform?
I'm going the vintage, black pinstripe, star over the eye, just classic one. When they brought those back, it was one of Victor Oladipo's first years, and they were all in those all black, classic pinstripes. Those to me, I'd roll them out every day. I just play in them, nonstop. Forget it.
I'm a big fan of the black pinstripes.
Yeah.
Really, really big fan of the black pinstripes.
Followed closely by the blue. I love the blue version of that as well.
Now, last question for you, Dan. Favorite current NBA player to watch?
Okay, so this is interesting. I'm glad you brought this up. So I'm a guy that, like, I get really into the draft hype, meeting these guys at the combine, looking at all these guys. So I love watching guys in their first, second year in the NBA. So, like, for example, I was, super into when I first started out with the league, because I started writing for NBA.com from 2006 to 2008 before I joined the Magic, 2008, 2009. And like I had the, then Pacific Division, and it was assigned a lot of Seattle Supersonics games along with the Phoenix Suns. And I remember watching Kevin Durant at the beginning of his career. And, some of the things people like, if Twitter was around then and we had like a record, I remember the conversations, people talking about Kevin Durant and early in his career. Will he ever be a winning player? Or is he just going to have like hollow stats? Is he ever going to be an efficient scorer? And then we look all these years later, and that's just like stupid. This is why you don't put any stock even into like a full season, because people are having those conversations about Kevin Durant. Like I remember at the time, after his first season in the NBA, is he going to be an efficient enough scorer? So that's why I don't put too much, stock into any of that. And, still years later, one of my favorite players to watch, like Karl Anthony Towns, early iteration of him, shout out to the fellow Piscataway, New Jersey native. I loved watching the beginning phases of his career. Trae Young, same thing. I think the guy I'm already following, I had two guys I really liked in the draft, and one was Jalen Suggs. So it's awesome that I get to cover him night in, night out. And another guy was Jalen Green. So I'm excited to watch him a lot this season. I think he's got that kind of scoring factor about him. I think the interesting part that you're going to have to watch is like, okay, how does he balance being an effective, electrifying scorer, which I think he can be at this level, with also getting teammates involved in making winning plays. And so that's going to be the interesting thing. I end up, watching these guys and trying to make these rash judgments that I'm just warning other people not to make myself, and having those in conversations. But so I'll probably be watching a lot of in addition to obviously covering the Magic, watching a lot of him this season. I think I could already find myself, I'm already watching a lot of preseason tape and trying to come to those conclusions, so as well as the time he played in summer league.
Yeah, I think that during the draft or before the draft lottery, Alan and I, we were talking, we're like, as long as we get one of the Jalen's, just give me one. That's all we need. Yeah, no,
I'm with you. Like I looked at Jalen Suggs and I'm like, okay, this guy just has like winner written all over him. And the things he does well are what translate to winning in the NBA right now. And it's just like, and not when Jalen Suggs, it's just not all about him. It's about what the team, it's about what wins. And I just think he's going to, as he develops, he's going to figure out just how perfect times to turn on the switch from I've got to be, a scorer and win my team help my team win by putting the ball in the basket. And then also when to turn it off and, become a facilitator, get another guy going, and then play big on the defensive end. Because as we see in the NBA, you have to be able to be balanced on both ends of the floor. And I think he's a perfect example of that and the kind of guy you want leading your, franchise.
And we're going to get more of that. We'll be able to see the regular season that's coming right around the corner to really start to see, the beginning of the development for Jalen Suggs, Franz Wagner, and the rest of the Magic group. Dan, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. It was definitely a lot of fun. Thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge. And for those that want to continue following you, please share your social media.
Well, yeah, just follow on Twitter. That's where I do the most Magic related stuff at Dan_Savage. Happy to have a follow, a retweet, whatever you want to do, or just talk about my last name.
All right. Dan the Savage. Till the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the OZone Podcast, the voice of Magic fans. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the OZone Pod. And remember to subscribe and leave a 5-star review on all your favorite podcast listening platforms.